without you applying any pressure. So system controller button preset up, which I will show you later on in this video. So starting off, we have dead zones on the right and left stick. Currently I have 9 on the right stick and 5 on the left stick. Now, dead zones determine the responsiveness of both of your sticks. If you have this really low, the controller will feel responsive, at the same time you may have stick drift. This will your character turn on the spot without you applying any pressure, so the cursor on your map may move the way you need to. If this value is too low, like that, and struggling to line up my crosshair on targets' heads when they're at a bit of a distance, because your controller is really responsive and thus responds to light movements. 9 and 5 is a good spot for me at the moment with my controller. Vibration, I've had this disabled since forever. Forward running sensitivity. Now this is an important one for your character movement, and I know a lot of players do not fully understand what this setting does. So, forward running sensitivity determines how much control you have over your character while running in a straight line. If you have this value low and you are running in a straight line, gentle movements to your left stick will cause your character to move left or right depending on which way you turn it. If you have this value high at 50, which is the max for example, when you're running in a straight line, you will have to apply greater pressure to your left stick in order to allow your character to move left or right while running. I recommend going into training mode, lowering this to say 10, and then running in a straight line and gently wiggle your left stick left or right. You will find that you have control over your character while running. Now if this is really high, you'll see you'll have to put more pressure on your left stick in order to get your character to move left or right. If this value is too high for me, I find that I get stuck on doorways and ledges way too often in PUBG, and everyone I know does that at some point. Now, if you have this way too low, you may also find that it's uncontrollable. So I suggest just going into training mode, lowering this down to 10 and then increasing it in increments of 5 or 10 or even less, whatever you want, until you feel like you have good control over your character while running. Movement sensitivity. I have mine set to 20, and this determines the speed of your character while doing circular motions, looting a box, or just in cover, moving left to right. I have this similar to my forward running sensitivity because it just feels natural to me and I'm able to move in and out of cover at a good speed. Vertical sensitivity multiplier. I have mine on 62. I have played with it on 50 for the longest time, but I have since increased it in the last 6 months. What this does is it determines the speed of your camera looking up and down. I find that if I have this too high, when I'm running up a hill or approaching a building and a character pops up on the roof, I'm trying to aim up. If my value's too high for this, I'll end up aiming above the building, I'll end up aiming at the clouds and just completely missing my target. Now, having a lower value does mean that I have to pull down on my right stick more when spraying to control my recoil. But I like to shoot towards 100 meters plus with a red dot. That's my way to play, and this just gives me good control over that distance. I do recommend lowering it down and just practicing finding the right value for you. General sensitivity. Mine is really low and it's on 7. I prefer to center up enemies on my screen and spend minimal time trying to correct and adjust and get my character in screen. With a lower general sensitivity, I'm able to do this as I am pretty heavy on the sticks, so if my sense is too high, I'm always swinging too far left, too far right. I'm spending crucial time trying to correct to get players in my screen. I do use shotguns a lot, and I will not ADS with them. I will hip fire, which in my opinion is the best way to use shotguns. So having a lower general enables me to keep my player in the screen without constantly swinging too far left or too far right. A good training practice I have for general sensitivity is in the pre-game lobby or in training mode, just look at players or objects in the distance like mountains and buildings and shacks, and line up your crosshairs, which you do have if you have no weapon. You'll have a little dot on your screen. Line that up with each object. Look left, look right, try and line up those mountains or those shacks in the center of your screen on your crosshair, and if you find you can do that quite consistently, then your sense is okay. But if you find you're constantly going too far to the right, too far to the left, then I would recommend lowering your general for me, that's a good training exercise to get my general dialed in. Vehicle driver sensitivity, I have this on 7, just the same as my general, pretty much it's just for OCD purposes. Aim acceleration, I have this disabled. I've played with it around about 3.5 for the last 6 months, but I've since turned this off. What aim acceleration does is it increases the speed of your aiming when you apply 50% or more pressure to your left steer. So for example, if I'm aiming at a wall and I move my stick right or left, you can see that my aim will speed up even if I spin all the way around. This includes just your character moving, spinning as well. But what a lot of people may not know is when you have aim acceleration enabled, it will actually cause your initial movement to be slower than if it was off. So I had my ascends on 5 for my 1 times, and since turning aim acceleration off, compensate for speed up, I've actually changed my 1 times to 4.5, because when you initially ADS and move your stick left or right, it will actually be slower to begin with and then speed up. So when you have it off, your ascends may actually feel faster. Inventory sensitivity, I have this on 8. Just works for me when I'm moving in between my inventory. Over the shoulder aiming sensitivity. Now this determines the speed of your soft aim when in third person. Of course, Pubg being predominantly a third person shooter, this is an ideal setting really to have tuned in. I rarely ever actually use this. If I'm too close to an enemy, I'll normally just strafe, hip fire, which is determined by your general sense. My 1 times is generally too low in order to ADS when I'm in close range to enemies. So I've got this at 8 at the moment. I do like to try and hit random no scopes with the soft aim, and tracking players with this soft aim at 8 feels good for me. Aiming down sight sensitivity. Now, here are my scopes. My 1 times is on 4.5. My 2 times, which I really use, is on 5. My 6 times is what I use for AR sprays a lot. My favourite scope is 6.5. 4, 6 and 8. The 3 optics that I use for sniping are all on 5.9. The 15 scope, which thankfully is now fixed, is on 6.9. My 1 times, this is my bread and butter. I love spraying with a red dot or holographic over far distances, and having my optics at 4.5 gives me that control over greater distances. If I have this too high, I'll be great up close, aiming down my sight, but that's not my play style. 4.5 gives me good control at greater distances. I used to have this on 5, but since I turned aim acceleration off, I have compensated for the increased speed. I have aim acceleration off, increased initial speed like I mentioned. So this is 4.5. I rarely ever use the 2 times scope. It is a decent scope, but I just rarely use it. 5 feels good for me. 6.5 on the 3 times. By default, this scope just feels slower than the rest of them. So I've got this on 6.5, and this is much all 3 of them at ease. 5.9 feels good for me on there. 5.9 on the 6 times. I don't really use this scope for spraying much, but 6 and 8 are my 2.
On how you can find your perfect setup, as well as tell you all about some useful hidden settings in PUBG Console that let's get you should have the paddles on the back. In fact, I just use one paddle on the back, which I use for hold to crouch, which is super useful. And I'm going to explain a little bit later in the video how you can set that up yourselves. I do also have the hair triggers enabled for both sides. You used to have to update the dead zones for these so you can drive cars properly, but with the Elite 2 you don't have to do that anymore. And I'm just running the default sticks that come on, and you can plan training option. You also see that if you members. So if you do have a B and C, type B basically means you hold down the left trigger in order to aim. Type A means the left trigger is a toggle on and off for ADS, and type C is if you play in more of a claw grip. Most people I find these days tend to use type B. That's certainly what I use. Invert X and Y, don't worry about. I have inverted Y, but that's just if you use it, you do. If you don't, you don't. Dead zones, I have a 5 and 6 these days. I used to have them a bit higher because if you have stick drift, then turning these up will get rid of the stick. I wouldn't play around with this too much because whenever you change it, you're going to have to get used to recoil feeling different, because it's then going to require a stronger or a weaker push up or down on the stick to counter recoil than it did before you changed this setting. So once you found an okay setting with this, then I advise keeping that fairly consistent. General sense I have on 12. This is your sensitivity when just looking around when not aiming, like this. It can go up to 20. I've had it a lot higher at times, but I've set it on 12 just to give me a little bit more accuracy when I'm moving around. There's always going to be a trade-off between speed and accuracy, but for me this was pretty good little sweet spot for me. I like to run a sort of medium general sense and then quite a low ADS sense. And by low ADS sense I mean, if I'm aiming in like this, you can see if I drag along even a full stick push here, it's quite slow to move around. Whereas if you ran 18 or 20, that would be very, very quick. But when I play, I tend to zoom out and then aim back in on targets like this. So I'm coming out of ADS, I'm looking with my general sense, the new target, and then I'm zooming back in. And that's kind of how I tend to do it. Some people prefer to play by staying aimed in the whole time, which isn't going to work very well with these settings because you see it's quite slow to move between targets. Okay for these ones, but moving across the battlefield, if we're ADS'd in, if we drag it all the way over here like this, it's just if we drive a sense just on 10, that 50 close up, it can be quite useful for that sort of thing. It does make it somewhat it's an 8 on 5 longer. Now to prove if you're really struggling, this training room be a great little way to be very useful. So I will come out of ADS and stand up again. So it's a really nice kind of way of making sure. Some settings that are into targets in here is the car shooting range. If you go down here, you see we've got these pretty fast moving cars, and this is a great way to practice your tracking of moving vehicles. You see the white numbers, by the way, are normal shots. When we see the red numbers, that means we've hit. On people, the red is for headshots. On the vehicles, it's for the driver's seat, I believe. Another one I quite like to do is take the Dragunov into the training room with a 2x and then just try and headshot everything as quickly and efficiently as I can. It's a bit of a practice, useful. So I've got to get that set up. You don't necessarily need to have a controller with paddles on, but it does make it a little bit easier. So what basically I do here is I hold down the single paddle I have on the left-hand side of my controller and my character crouches. When I let go of it, my character will stand up again. And I really like using this because it's on the left-hand side of my controller. I can basically grip the whole left-hand side of my controller and I will ADS and crouch at the same time because I'm holding the left trigger and the left paddle. And then when I let go, I will come out of ADS and stand up again. So it's a really nice kind of way of making sure you can crouch every time that you spray your gun. Crouching gives you a big recoil reduction in PUBG, so it is very useful to crouch as much as you can. Now to set stuff like this up, you need to go into system menu and controller settings, and there you'll find this menu. In here you can change all sorts of stuff. When you create one initially, it'll be based off one of the default control types like B or A or C or whatever, and then when you're in here you can basically change what any of the different inputs on your controller do. So I could make up on the D-pad be ADS or fire weapon or anything I wanted it to be within reason. There's also stuff like here, so you can change reload, so it was tap to reload instead of hold to reload, and all sorts of other things you can change. What I have set up is, so down on my D-pad is set to hold to crouch. The hold is this green icon, by the way, here. So if I hold down on the D-pad, my character will crouch, and then in my Xbox Elite controller settings, I have the paddle on the back of my controller bound to down on the D-pad. So I press in the paddle on the back, the game thinks it's down on the D-pad, and I crouch, so I let go and I stand up again. Obviously, there's lots of other stuff you can use paddles on a controller for. A lot of people use them for leaning, for holding breath, stuff like that. I don't really bother with that. I use the default controls for leaning. I rarely even bother holding breath. I still just have that on LB. Another really useful thing to know about within these menus is that if you click in the right stick, you see at the bottom of the screen it says combination. Go to this menu, you get LB combination and RB combination, and on here you can set up hotkeys basically. So you can see here on the right I have one set up, so it's LB and Y, LB and X, LB and B, LB and A. They all perform different actions. So if I press LB and Y, then I'll take a first aid without having to open my menu. If I press LB and X, and any drink, etc, etc. You can do the same for various different things. You can use it for taking meds, for selecting throwables, and for changing seats in vehicles. I also have it set up to take me into the driver's seat or the passenger seat in vehicles, which I find quite useful. Rather than having to hold A to get into the driver's seat, I can tap RB and A and it's a tiny bit quicker. By the way, if you need to move your limited interact, I've got mine on RB and LB together. It does seem to limit you on what you can actually move this button to. You do use it for quite a few things like picking up knocked enemies or teammates, skinning vehicles in certain ways, and other things like that. So do make sure you find that to something that you can actually reach. So lastly, I just want to quickly run through a few of the other gameplay settings that are quite useful to know about. A lot of these are pretty self-explanatory.